Hey, what's up? This is Mr. Ippolito, and this is Instructions, Tips, and Tricks for your Constitution Interactive Notebook, pages 8 through 11. Now, pages 8 through 11, it is strictly the three branches of government, right? So it's a very narrow focus. Try to make it easy for you to just focus on one thing. This is slide 8, and on slide 8, it is literally just the organization of the three branches of government. So you've got the legislative branch that makes the laws, the executive branch that enforces or executes the laws, and the judicial branch that interprets the laws. And then right here, what is the legislative branch made up of? Legislative branch at the federal level for the United States is Congress. It's the Senate and the House of Representatives. For the executive branch, it's the president, the vice president, the cabinet. I'm going to add something as well that's not in here, which is all those federal departments, right? So whether it's the Department of Justice, the FBI, the TSA, they're the ones who screen us at the airports, the FAA, that's the Federal Aviation Administration, they're the ones who manage the safety on airlines. Whether it's the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, they're the ones who regulate farming and some of the food that we get. Or if it's the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, they're the ones who would authorize a COVID vaccine, for example. That's all under the executive branch. The Secret Service, the CIA, the FBI, it's all executive branch, right? Because what they do is Congress makes laws and says this is how we want our country to be, and then the actual execution of those laws and the carrying out and the enforcing of those laws all happens within the executive branch. And then finally, the judicial branch, they interpret the law. So that's our court system, right? The Supreme Court and then other federal courts. And so it's their responsibility whenever there's a conflict that arises about law, they're the ones who ultimately interpret the law for us. So for example, when there was a question about whether or not segregation, right? So separating black children and white children in schools, or forcing black Americans to have to use separate drinking fountains or restrooms or seats on the bus or cars on a train, whatever, this was happening in the early 1900s up until the 1950s and 1960s. But finally, the Supreme Court in the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 said that segregation is unconstitutional. It took a little bit longer. It took a couple more acts of Congress, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It took the legislative branch working a little bit harder, and then the executive branch actually having to enforce that. But it all started with that Supreme Court case, the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, that said that segregation is unconstitutional. Another example of the Supreme Court interpreting what is constitutional and unconstitutional would be the Obergefell versus Hodges case. That was decided in 2010, and that was the Supreme Court case that said that same-sex marriage, to discriminate against same-sex couples when it came to marriage, was unconstitutional. And so any of the states that were discriminating against those same-sex couples, they were violating their 14th Amendment constitutional rights, and therefore any laws that any states pass that discriminate against people getting married on the basis of their sex or gender were unconstitutional. So basically in 2010, the Supreme Court declared that same-sex marriage is legal, again, because they have the ability to interpret not only federal laws, but also state laws as constitutional or unconstitutional. So that is a little bit of background on the three branches of government. Now let's move on to slide 9. How do we do this? So what you're going to do is basically, if you just what I talked about in the last slide, if you describe this branch here, you say it's the United States Congress, and which consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they make the laws. You put that there. And then the executive branch, it's the president, the vice president, his cabinet, right? So the cabinet, the president's cabinet would be the Secretary of State, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, all of the different cabinet positions, those secretaries. That is the executive branch. And just like I talked about in the last slide, it's all of those federal departments, the CIA, the FBI, the TSA, the FDA, the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, by the way. It is all part of the executive branch. They execute the laws. And then finally, the judicial branch, describe this branch. Like I said, it's the Supreme Court and other federal courts, and they interpret the laws. And so then this is where, and I'm not going to do all of the work for you. You're going to do some research on this. Watch the Brain Pop video. You can click on this link here, or if you click this link here, oh, there we go. I'm not going to start it. But essentially, you can get the rest of this information here. What I just shared, like I literally just taught you this, and this part right here. But then in this part, powers this branch has over the other two branches. Now we're talking about checks and balances. So this is list two things, two checks that the legislative branch has over executive and judicial. Executive, list two checks that the executive has over legislative and judicial. I'll give you an example here. So the executive branch, the president, can veto laws that are made by Congress, right? A power that Congress has over the president is Congress can override a presidential veto, right? Another power that the executive branch has over the judicial branch, the president appoints members of the Supreme Court, justices to serve in the Supreme Court. So the president gets to have that power over the judicial branch. But the judicial branch can declare executive actions, presidential actions, unconstitutional. So like, for example, when President Richard Nixon in 1974 wanted to prevent some evidence from coming out in a scandal known as the Watergate scandal, like he was in trouble, he was hiding stuff, he was acting shady. And so finally, Congress, this is a power that Congress has over the executive branch. Legislative over executive is the power of impeachment. And so Congress they were about to impeach President Nixon. And so that's a power that legislative has over executive. They were about to impeach him. They were holding hearings, and they were like, hey, there are some tapes, there are some recordings that you made in the White House that we think have evidence that would incriminate you. And the president's like, I'm not handing them over. And Congress is like, uh-huh. And the president's like, uh-uh. And so finally, Congress had to sue the president, and it went to the Supreme Court. This is more checks and balances. And so finally, the Supreme Court is like, and the case was called the United States versus Nixon. Finally, the Supreme Court had to say, you know what, Mr. President, you have to hand over those tapes. You have to, even if you're the president of the United States, you have to hand them over. That's called the rule of law. No one is above the law, not even President Richard Nixon. And so that was a check that the judicial branch had against the president, is the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, can declare executive actions unconstitutional. So they each have powers, like they can limit and check the powers of the other branches. For more information, you should watch this Brain Pop video to help fill this whole thing out. Speaking of the Brain Pop video, now we're moving to slide 10, and this is just straight up like vocab. You could probably figure this out without watching the Brain Pop video, but I think the Brain Pop video is super helpful. So you're basically just going to put in here, A, B, so like you're going to match, fill in these blanks, but instead put the letter that matches with what the definition is. So that's a straight up like vocab assignment. And then finally, for number 11, this requires a little bit more explanation. So you're going to draw lines. Now, I went ahead and created some lines for you already, some blue, red, and green lines. So, for example, decides cases involving the Constitution. Well, if we're talking about deciding cases, we're talking about court cases, and the court system is the judicial branch. So I'm going to take this. Watch what I'm doing. So I'm clicking on this line here, and I'm doing Control-C to copy. And then I'm going to do Control-V to paste. And you'll notice it is now pasted. And so now I can take this end, and I can match it up there, and this end, and I can make it go there, and there we go. So now I've just done that. So what you'll do is you'll copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste, makes treaties. Who makes treaties with other nations? Well, figure it out. Again, if you're not sure, like Mr. Ippolito, what do I do? How do I figure this out? You can go to the Brain Pop video, and that will help you out. Also, the textbook is a great resource. I know I don't talk about the textbook much, but the textbook would be another great resource for this as well. But I think you can get all of those answers from the Brain Pop video right here. So there you go. And if you have any other questions, then talk to Mr. Ippolito. But that's how you do slides 8 through 11 in the Constitution Interactive Notebook. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.